So we're in week 4 of a series called It Came From Within. And we have been talking about how at home and at work and at school and in dating relationships and with friends and family and even with absolutely complete strangers, people that you meet when you're walking down the street, we develop a filter. And we pass everything that we say and what we do and how we act through that filter. We learn that there are probably things that we should say and things we shouldn't. Things that we should do, things we probably shouldn't. Now, the thing is, a filter isn't bad. It's just that it's limited. It has limited scope, limited power. After all, a filter is only meant to, as we've said in the last couple of weeks, it's only meant to deal with what flows through it, not what flows to it. So, even the most carefully monitored filter can fail, and when it does, things can pop out. And some of those things, maybe things that surprise other people, they may even surprise us a little bit. We might go, where'd that come from? But see, the deal is, Jesus makes it very clear those things come from our heart. And if we're being honest with ourselves, we know that anyway, don't we? When we say, where did that come from? Well, it came from within. It came from within us. That's why he tells us in Matthew chapter 12, verse 34, the second part of it, he says, "For out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks." Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. Now Solomon, son of King David, considered to be biblically, certainly I would say, just universally, considered to be the wisest human who ever lived. He explains why this information is so very important when he tells us in Proverbs 4:23, above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. It's kind of your source, where you live from. Gang, our hearts need to be protected. They need to be protected. So trying to manage things with our filter is kind of a failing option. That's why we're redirecting our focus to 4 specific heart issues that can sneak in and grow into big monsters and damage us from within. If you're dealing with one or more of these heart issues, I would have to say you need to expose them for what they are. And as the Apostle Paul tells us in Colossians 3, verse 5, first part of verse 5, put to death the sinful earthly things lurking within you. Now, I know that's a preachery thing to say, but I think it's also an extraordinarily practical thing to say. If our hearts need to be protected, then we need to go to that source, to our heart, to do battle with the things that will run amok inside there, that will do damage to the wellspring of our life. It's not just that the things that are running around on the inside will eventually run around on the outside and spill over onto other people. Yes, that's very true. But, gang, this is a very practical series because most people carry around stuff, much of, if not all of their adult lives, that just fester like an open wound. And they don't get better. And there are a lot of sort of mitigating solutions that are placed on these things. Like the old adage that time heals all wounds, which is just hooey. Because it doesn't, does it? I mean, it really doesn't. Time passes may allow you to look at something with a more measured perspective. You might be able to put some things in a slightly less volatile position, but it doesn't mean that it simply healed it. See, the thing about these four particular heart issues that we're talking about is that they don't tend to go away. When we first moved to Houston, there was this issue that everybody was doing home inspections on: black mold. And people would say, oh, don't buy a house if it's got black mold. You're going to have to tear the whole thing down, start over again. And I thought, wow, I don't think that's even in the realm of possibility for us. I mean, do you know what I do for a living? You know, it's like, I don't think we're going to have that luxury. But when the hurricanes started to hit, and with flooding, mold, whether it's black or otherwise, was definitely an issue that had to be dealt with. And everybody that had to tear out sheetrock and do rebuilding would tell you that it was vitally important to get the wet stuff out as soon as possible. And then there was a couple of solutions that you could mix up and spray all over everything. And the idea was to keep it from growing that mold. And bleach wasn't enough, unfortunately, because the stuff was just kind of persistent, and it kind of defied being destroyed. Every one of the heart issues that we're talking about in this series is kind of like that. They defy being destroyed. They don't go quietly. They don't go easily. And if you just cover them back up, they're not going to go away. They'll just fester and get worse. The good news is we have good news. We have a whole book of solutions and a love letter from a God that says, I am never going to leave you or forsake you. So as we go to the root of each of these issues, I want to also reiterate that none of these things are meant to be diagnostic tools that you put in place by yourself. This is not a self-help series. This is a series designed to help us to know that we need someone bigger than us to help us get to the root of these things and help us to tear it out once and for all. And if you're like me, some of these things in your heart may be like that crepe myrtle tree that I have in my backyard that continues to grow out of the stump of the other 2 or 3 crepe myrtle trees that are probably there before it. You may have to pull it up, and you may find that something else grows in its place, and you've got to pull that up again. And the great news is that God is there every step of the way to walk with you and help you do this. That's what I don't want you to miss in anything else that we say through this series. You do not have to do this alone. It's not meant to encourage you to do it by yourself. The idea is, let's just get these things out into the light, and then let's call on the God of the universe to show us what needs to happen, what he needs to help us with, to guide us into digging this stuff out and getting rid of it, and then replacing it with something that's from him. So, throughout this series, we've been using these 4 kind of classic movie monsters to represent each of our heart issues that we're uncovering. We talked about how guilt is like a mummy. It can seem like an unrelenting force that just keeps coming, that guilt is rooted in an undeniable feeling that I owe you something, and that the only way to really unwrap guilt is through appropriate confession. And then last week we talked about how unrestrained anger, sort of like the wolf man, can transform us. That anger is a dangerous kind of spreading infection when it gets like that. And that it's rooted in this idea that you owe me something, and that the only real silver bullet to get rid of this werewolf, this unrestrained anger, is through the process of forgiveness. Forgiveness is really the solution that helps us go to the root of that heart issue and pull it up and get rid of it so it doesn't fester anymore. Now this week, the hard issue we're going to talk about is greed. And I got to tell you guys, I used to be really uncomfortable talking about this stuff. As a matter of fact, growing up in the era that I grew up in and doing this particular job, coming from where I came from kind of just a very blue-collar Midwestern town in a place where people were fairly skeptical of the church, maybe sometimes for good reason. Man, I got really sweaty talking about money because I could hear all those people in the back of my head saying those things. All the church wants is your money. I have to be totally honest with you. That's one of the reasons why that basket in the back, the joy basket, is the way we do offering. Because I want it to be really clear that when people are here exploring, I hope that we give you a gift. And that the church isn't out to get your money, but things like finances are tied to important things. And I don't think it's a spoiler alert for me to say that I believe it's tied to your heart. So let's talk about our monster, and then we'll talk about this issue, which I have a lot less issue talking about now. All right? Just know I'm talking to me too. So we paint the picture again. It's, of course, a dark and stormy night. Because how else would it be? And a couple has found their way through the rain to an old mansion. The owner has been kind enough to let them stay until the storm passes. But the couple has a strange feeling about him. As he leads them through a large dining room, they pass by a large full-length mirror as they head toward a great hall. And the couple is confused because although they can see themselves in the mirror, they can't see their host. They only see the candelabra that he carries. And as they turn back to him, he smiles, showing them his fangs and confirming their fears. Their host is a vampire, yes. Cue Scary Laugh by Vincent Price. Or The Count from Sesame Street, if you prefer. That's fine, too. It's all right. Two victims. Okay. So, how in the world is greed like a vampire? Well, again, I'm telling you guys, sometimes these things just write themselves. First of all, undeniably, greed has an unquenchable thirst. An unquenchable thirst. If you've read the book or seen the old movie, one of the first things that you discover about Dracula is that he is thirsty. But he'll never be interested in a Capri Sun or a Dr. Pepper. Or as the movie always famously puts out, I do not drink wine, he says. And even if he gets what he wants, he will never be satisfied. Instead, he will just want more and more and more. That's what greed is like in our lives. Our good friends Merriam-Webster, the dictionary people, they tell us that greed is a selfish and excessive desire for more of something than is needed. A selfish and excessive desire for more of something than is needed. With greed, there is no such thing as, that's enough. And in Luke chapter 12, Jesus gives this warning about it. First part of it, sorry, easy for me to say. Let me just take a drink. First part of verse 15 says this. Then he said to them, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. That's my emphasis there, that underline. It doesn't appear in your Bibles, although if you want to underline it in your Bibles, that would be fine. In 1922, before Bram Stoker's book, Dracula, became a movie, a silent film called Nosferatu was made about a vampire, and it was scary. Scary. I'm talking about people screaming and fainting in the theater. Scary. Besides the way it was filmed, one of the creepiest things about the movie was the monster itself. I don't even want to put the picture up too long because I don't want you to be too scared. Are you ready? Go ahead. See what I'm saying? Scary. All right. Well, one thing is for sure. If you saw something like that when you opened the door, chances are you'd be able to identify it pretty quickly. All right? Some kinds of greed are that easy to identify. In the late 80s, any children of the 80s in here? Okay. There was this movie called Wall Street made by Oliver Stone. And it featured a character played by Michael Douglas named Gordon Gekko. And Gekko was literally the embodiment of this idea of things that aren't too hard to identify. As a matter of fact, he gives this sort of very memorable speech in that movie in which he says, greed, for a lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works. Greed clarifies, cuts through, and captures the essence of the evolutionary spirit. Now see, just like Bela Lugosi's Dracula, and how he was much more subtle as a monster than Nosferatu was, right? I mean, scary or not, much more subtle. There are times when greed is a lot less obvious than Gordon Gekko. Yeah. Especially when we see it in ourselves, because greed casts no reflection. You see, gang, there's nothing wrong with being careful or thrifty financially. And I'm not going anyplace with this. There's nothing wrong with it. We teach our children the discipline of saving, right? And the blessing of being a good steward of what God gives us. It's admirable to take care of your family and to plan for the future. In short, I mean, I really mean this. There is nothing wrong with these things, and nothing wrong with being financially responsible. I really mean that. There's no secret caveat here, okay? So why bring all that stuff up? Good question. Well, in short, the answer is this. Greed is the heart issue that has learned that it can sometimes hide behind the good stuff. Greed is the heart issue that has discovered that it can sometimes hide behind the good stuff. So it sneaks in behind the good practices, behind the honorable intentions. And it slowly and subtly begins to change our perspective on what we have. Now, I want to be really clear as I say this. I'm still never going to say that the things that I just mentioned before are wrong, because they're not. They are the good stuff. I think we should be good stewards of what God gives us. I think it's a good idea to save. I think it's a good idea to take care of our families and to take care of other people that have needs. I think that is a good thing. I have lived my life trying to do these things. But greed loves to sneak in behind the good stuff and establish itself as a, yeah, that's right, but also, yeah, that's good, but you should, yeah, that's good, but you better be careful of. Yeah, that's great. You've done really well. But you know what? What if? So even though greed doesn't really cast a reflection when we look at ourselves, the subtle change in our perspective is the weakness that allows that monster to be identified. You see, guilt says, I owe you, right? And anger says, you owe me. Greed says, I owe me. Since the debt and the debtor relationship that greed generates all kind of happens inside us, it can be tough for us to see it in ourselves. But greed's weakness is that it gives us a perspective on things that doesn't hide very well from the people around us. So in the book that these messages are based from, the book called It Came From Within, Andy Stanley talks about some of the ways that greed shows itself in someone's life. And these are a little hard to listen to, okay? That's why I'm reading them in bullet form. Because it's a little touchy for me, okay? Greedy people talk a lot and worry a lot about money. Greedy people are not cheerful givers. They are reluctant to share. This is interesting. Greedy people are often poor losers. They talk as if they have just enough to get by, no matter how much that enough is. Greedy people often create a culture of secrecy around themselves. They won't let you forget what they've done for you. Greedy people are reluctant to express gratitude. Greedy people are not content with what they have, and greed will cause us to attempt to control others with our money. These are just some of the perspective-changing tells. You know, for several years, and it's still, I guess, popular, but it was really popular for a while, almost kind of virally popular, for people to watch like Texas Hold'em tournaments on TV, watch poker tournaments. And I know that's still advertised, a lot of people watch, but they often tell you, they would talk about the best players have no tells. Their expression doesn't change when their hand changes or they're thinking and strategizing in different ways. Yeah, these are the tells that reveal that maybe greed has sort of snuck its way in behind the good stuff and is just motivating us to sort of change our perspective on why we do what we do. If it sounds very nefarious, I would say it is. It's one of the sneakiest of all the hard issues that we're dealing with. It's like I said, it tries to hide behind good stuff. And I also want to make a disclaimer that if the good stuff describes who you are, it doesn't mean that I'm saying that you're greedy. Not at all. That would simply be Satan trying to twist what I'm saying here. What I'm telling you is there's a reason why Jesus says, be on guard. As a matter of fact, let's finish reading that verse. Luke 12:15. Then he said to them, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. So it'd be easy to skim over this verse really quickly and just move on, but what Jesus says here is pretty significant, and it needs to be seen. So let's stop and just take notice. See, gang, a man or a woman's life is not made up of the things he or she owns. Now, we know that, right? I'm sure we kind of know it here. But sometimes what greed does is it makes a disconnect between here and here. So I want you to remember, your life does not consist of the abundance of what you own. It just doesn't. I am a car guy, okay? I mean, I am really a car guy. I like cars. My wife will tell you that. I really like cars. Now, there are people that know cars better than me, that know the details much better than I do. But I'm no less a car guy. And pretty much my whole life, I've always had vehicles that I thought, boy, a really cool car to own. And my cars are often weird. They're kind of quirky, the ones that I want to own. Like as a kid, I just wanted to own the Mach 5, and I'd been okay. Did you ever watch Speed Racer when they were growing up? Yeah, that's the car I wanted. But really, one of my ideal cars to own would be like a 68 Ford Bronco. Really love to own an old Ford Bronco with a, I mean, I would take it with a 305. But, yeah. I got the car guys going, no, you need to go for it. Yeah. All righty, we're going to risk getting off track. But here's what I'm saying. What I've discovered, as much as I hate to say this, as a car guy, because I love cars, is that sometimes I have owned cars that I've enjoyed driving. Sometimes I've owned cars that I didn't enjoy driving, but they were really reliable and they just never gave up the ghost. We were at one point generously sold a Chevy Lumina for $1. The Chevy Lumina had 245,000 miles on it when we got it. It had 278,000 miles on it when we sold it. And we gave all the money that we got from selling it back to the people that sold it to us for $1. Which was a whopping, I think, $900. But if you don't know, a Chevy Lumina minivan is essentially a doorstop with wheels. It's got the front dash looks like the deck of the Starship Enterprise. It's got a windshield roughly the size of Michigan. And it wasn't a cool car to own. Although I got to tell you, you could camp in that thing. And it was awesome. You could get a lot of stuff in a Lumina minivan. But I've had vehicles that I didn't think were cool, and some that I really enjoyed driving. I had a 69 Cutlass when I was in college. Loved that car. Fire engine red, white speed stripes on the hood, 350 rocket, 4-barrel quadrajet on it. It was nice. Not the biggest thing you could own, but it was very nice. I loved that car. Here's the deal, though. Every single one of those cars is someplace else now, and I have no idea where they are. And some people would say, wow, too bad you sold that Cutlass. I'll tell you why I sold the Cutlass. There was a piece on it that kept breaking, and when I broke it the last time, the guy that I had a good relationship with said, you're getting the last shift cable in the state of Missouri, Jeff, because this is a flaw in this design. And after that, it's going to cost a lot more, and you're going to still have to replace it about every 6 to 8 months because they're just all worn out. And I decided, you know what? I'm getting married. I'd like to drive every day. I probably don't need to have my car in the garage every 6 months putting those kind of repairs into it. Everything that I have ever valued has worn out. Everything that I've ever desired has started to turn to dust. I will tell you, I gave a lot of guitar lessons to buy this instrument, okay? Bought it in the year 2000, and it was the most expensive guitar that I had ever purchased. And I use it all the time, and I'm very happy that I've got it. The frets have been changed 3 times, like they've worn out and had to be replaced. And if you look at it, if you get close to it, you see there's chips and knocks and dents, and the entire soundboard is like the finish is coming off of it, and it's worn out. And someday, this thing will probably look like Willie Nelson's acoustic guitar with a big hole in the front of it or something, because it just from playing it, and it will go back to the earth. Like Sean's fond of saying, a guitar always still thinks it's a tree anyway. You have to treat it like that. It will one day go back to the earth and be compost. It's just a thing. Your life does not consist of the abundance of your possessions. I want you to remember that, because we just get so lost in that if we're not careful. And it's just a trap. We have to be careful also that we're not evaluating our lives, like basically placing value on ourselves based on that kind of stuff. Another trap. Like a vampire, greed is most dangerous when it's hiding in the darkness. So if we want to destroy it, what we have to do is expose greed to the sun. Let's talk about that, exposing greed to the sunlight. Stanley writes, greed is supported by an endless cast of what-ifs. You know, things like, what if I'm not prepared? What if such and such happens? What if I don't have enough? Having 10 is good, but what if I could get 20? I have to admit that I'm still kind of hung up on that when it comes to ammunition. Since I don't have a lot of YouTube followers right now, maybe I can say that, and I won't be put on a watch list. I don't know. But there was a point where every time I got a paycheck, I went and I bought a large box of .22 ammunition, so I could go target shooting and never run out. And I still have an awful lot. But, you know, I can't help but think, if I could just have 550 more rounds of .22 ammunition, that would be better. Or 270 or 16 gauge. There's an endless cast of what-ifs that populates the world of the sneaky little critter that's called greed. And all these what-ifs, they make our stuff far from being a source of security, because that's what we want it to be when it changes our perspective, right? What it does is greed tells us, if you have this, you'll be safe. That's kind of one of the things that it says. Instead, what it does, since it's such a tricky little monster, it makes all of our things a source of anxiety for us. We end up thinking about them more than we need to, or worrying about them, or being concerned, again, if we have enough of them, or if we could fix it, or what we could do with it, or when you get right down to it, we're greedy because we think our stuff will help us. So if we accumulate, we'll be safer, and then we ask ourselves, do I have enough? And when the goal is being safe, and the means to being safe is accumulating, since it's an empty path, the answer is always, I don't have enough. If we're looking to feel safe by accumulation, we're always going to ask, do I have enough? And it's always going to be no, because we can't feel safe by chasing this stuff. Believe me, I grew up in kind of just an average sort of Midwest middle class family, and we had to work and save for a lot of stuff, and we were taught to take care of our stuff. And because of that, maybe I will admit that I grew up a little bit too fixated on my stuff. But my stuff has never made me feel safe. As a matter of fact, when we finally got a new car for the first time, I think it's the only new car we've ever had, but we were in Virginia and we had a hurricane a couple months later. And so the only kind of nice thing that we had at that point was that little green car of ours. And I will admit that I hardly slept that night because I thought, I'm going to wake up and the chimney's going to be sitting on the car. Or the barn, one of the barn or the outbuildings is going to blown over on that car. And I've never even told Tamara that, but it was a wake-up call to me. Like in the light of day when it was all right. And then a couple months later when I was moving snow tires off of my old pickup truck, and I had them loaded in the trunk of that car, and I took one of the snow tires out, and see, snow tires have studs in them. I had studded snow tires, okay. One of the studs caught the bumper and scratched all the paint off one section of the bumper. It's like that's what it sounded like. I had to take a breath and go, that was the first reaction, really. Wanted to sit in the gravel and cry. But I had to realize, man, it's a car. It's not even a fancy car. This car. See? Do I have enough? Is it nice enough? Well, the answer is never enough to give you security. Not the kind of security you're looking for, and never enough to give you peace. Much the opposite. That lack of peace inside is one of the things that breaks through the filter, and it spills out maybe all over your interactions with others, and eventually it deteriorates relationships. Greed really can deteriorate relationships. So, if we want to pull greed up by the roots, there's one very straightforward, simple method that we need. We need to be generous. The tool is generosity. Instead of asking, do I have enough? We're all going to have our minds blown here, okay? Instead of asking, do I have enough? I want to challenge you right now to ask yourself, why do I have so much? And some people are going to be like, well, I can answer you that because I don't have so much. Because if you're like most people, you probably don't think you have as much as you want, and certainly probably not as much as you need. And so it might seem like a very counterintuitive question, but what I'm saying is, I want to ask you to stop looking at what you don't have and instead look at what you've already got. Stop looking at what you don't have and instead look at what you've already got. I mean, let's just start simple with where you live. Do you have a place to sleep tonight? Can it keep the rain out? Can you make it warmer or cooler? That's kind of a score. Move to food. Will you eat today? I mean, spoiler alert, I can tell you that you could because we got donuts and food back there. But even if you're like, no, I don't do donuts. I think, what kind of psycho are you if you don't do? I'm just kidding. No, it's not. No. Sorry. But honestly, will you eat today? More than once? Will you have a choice? when, and what? Man, that's a huge score compared to most of this world. How about a car? To go right to the heart of what really is my weakness. Do you have one? Not what kind do you have? How new is it? Do you have a car? Able to drive? Score. And if you don't, do you have transportation? Like, do you have a way to get where you need to go? And that in itself is a blessing. Okay, now let's talk about surplus. That's a fun message to have on the front end of our yard sale as a community, right? I promise I didn't plan it that way. I really, really didn't. But God has a sense of humor. So let's just talk about surplus. I mean, do you have, and maybe you don't have all of these, maybe you have one, or maybe you don't feel like you have any of them, but if you really stop and think about it, maybe you do. Do you have any extra time? Now, see, some people are like, no, are you kidding me? I don't have any extra time. Literally, some of you are thinking, I do, but I'm afraid to say that I do because then somebody's going to judge me as not being a contributor to society because I have actually got time. But I'd like you to be proud of the fact that you have time because it's an asset, not a liability. If you have time, then you have opportunity. As a matter of fact, I think most of us should try to carve out a little more time because with more time comes more opportunity. And I just don't mean opportunity to make more money, but I'm an opportunity to be the hands and feet of Christ. Do you have any extra stuff? I mean, I got half a bay of stuff in my garage that's kind of extra right now, and I'm really looking forward to next week. Not just because I want it out, but because I'm really thinking there might be some people that can use that big old oak bookcase. It could be very good for somebody. And the great thing is, it was a gift to me. I would be delighted to give it to somebody else. But I'll put a couple dollars on it if that's what it takes for somebody to actually come and look at it. And then I'll just let them talk me down. And then if they want to feel like they got a great deal, that's fantastic. Because to me, the great deal is I get to give it to somebody that needs it. Do you have anything like that? It might not just be something you can put in the yard sale. It might really be something else that God's kind of putting on you and saying, man, you should talk to this person. Maybe they need this. You have this. Maybe they need it. You might even reluctantly say, I have extra money. So let's ask the question this way. Why has God given me more than I need? Why has God given me more than I need? How do you think you might be able to use your extra to help someone else? Listen, I don't normally do this, but I'm going to tell you, and I'm not going to name any names, and I'm not going to call anybody out, but I'm going to say this. The very fact that we exist as a church is because there are certain individuals among sort of the foundational people and others along the way who have asked these questions and said, yes, I have extra and I'm willing to give it. The very reason we're still meeting here today as a church is because there are people that that have gotten this. So I know this is truth. I've seen it in action, and we are all the recipients of the blessing of that right now. We're sitting here in the midst of that. Getting to think about what's next. And believe me, I don't take that for granted as a guy that watched a church plant when I was younger. Who was a worship leader at a church plant that failed. I don't take that for granted. Because I know that I could be sitting someplace else and in the quiet moments doing sort of the autopsy of this church in my heart. But instead, because of people choosing generosity, choosing to change their perspective and say, why has God given me this? And sometimes even giving sacrificially. And believe me, there are too many stories. Too many. Too many. My heart is literally filled with gratitude for those stories. So as you think about this and how you might be able to be a part of that, let me read you Matthew 6:19 through 21. Listen to what Jesus has to say here. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So we're back to the heart. And this is the inescapable truth here. If you're looking for your heart, gang, open up your checkbook and your calendar and just follow the money trail to the place where it intersects with the time trail. And at that intersection, you're going to see your heart right there. And before you say, hey, I don't like that, just, then take it up with the guy that wrote it. Don't, I'm just the messenger here. Jesus is telling us we want to find security and something that will last. We should invest our hearts in the kingdom. Anything else will leave you with an eternal thirst. So as we close, is everything okay in your heart? Are you mad at anybody? Are you waiting around for somebody to come to you and make things right? Have you had any extended imaginary conversations with anybody lately? Are you finding it hard to be content with what you have? Have you secretly celebrated someone's failure recently? Is anything going on that you hope no one discovers? Is there a question you hope nobody asks you? Have you lied recently to somebody that you love? The prayer is very simple. Father, teach me to guard my heart, for it is the wellspring of life. Let's pray together.